To get us started with, though, let me start with a joke. So a writer died, kind of break the ice a little bit. So a writer died and was given the opportunity to go to heaven or hell. She said, well, let me check out each place first. And as she descended into the fiery pits, she saw row upon row of writers, chained to desks, being whipped with thorny lashes. She said, oh my, well, let me check out heaven now. So then as she ascended up into heaven, she came to row upon row of desks with writers chained to these desks, being whipped with thorny lashes. And she said, wait a minute, this is the same as hell. Oh, no, it's not, replied an unseen voice. Here, your work gets published. We've got a couple of publishing professionals with us tonight. Randall Klein started his publishing career as an assistant in the Foreign Rights Department at Trident Media Group, a large literary agency. He became an agent 11 months later, selling foreign rights in peripheral markets and for backlist titles. In 2008, he switched over to the editorial side, joining Bantam Dell, an imprint of the Random House Publishing Group, as an assistant editor, editing new works as well as numerous reprints. Michael Strong, a little bit about Michael Strong, who is with us as well. After graduating from Middlebury College, Mike was a sailing instructor at the Hurricane Island Outward Bound School, a carpenter in Berkeley, California, an English teacher at a school for dyslexic students, and a graduate student in English at UNC Chapel Hill, where he read for Carolina Quarterly. He was a PhD candidate at the program in comparative literature and literary theory at the University of Pennsylvania, where he taught classes on technology and ethics, wrote a dissertation on Finnegan's Wake, and was an assistant director of the Penn National Commission. After 7 years in digital marketing at Sotheby's, he moved to marketing and publicity at Regal Literary and is now actively building his client list. Mike likes literary fiction, thrillers, and nonfiction about art, politics, science, business, and sports. A little bit about Victoria Skurnick, who is with us as well tonight. Victoria came to Levine Greenberg after being at the Book of the Month Club for almost 20 years. As editor-in-chief, she relished the opportunity to devour every kind of book, from the finest literary fiction to Yiddish for dogs. Victoria's other addiction besides reading is music, and she has sung in many choirs in New York City and spent a few ostensibly happy years singing rock in groups like Big and The Evolution. She is also the co-author with Cynthia Katz of 7 novels written under the pen name Cynthia Victor. My first question is about the options that writers have. And I'll ask you first, Randall, how important is an author's choice of literary agent in his or her career?
It's very important, but the operative word in that question is, thank you. The operative word in that question is career. It's less important for a writer to consider who is repping the book that they have in front of them as much as they should be considering who's going to rep them for years down the line through not only that first book that they're writing that they love and they have all this energy and that they've taken all this time to write, but the books that are going to be following that. They want an agent who will keep the publishers, feet to the coals of making sure that they're committed for a long time to a writer. And there's a big difference in that for agents for managing an author's book versus managing a career. But yeah, it's very important.
What would you say to that, Victoria?
I really agree with Randall. It's something that the head of my agency, Jim Levine, stresses on our website. In fact, we're all about people's careers. But just by the way, the same thing holds true for publishers. One of the things that we see now, and I don't mean to jump ahead, but is a book that some agent gets some publisher to pay a ton of money for, and then it doesn't sell well. And the author's career can be completely over. So one of the things you worry about as an agent is dealing with an editor and a publishing house that will stick with an author for the long haul, one that's really committed. And that's very hard to find these days.
Well, one of the things that I've encountered a lot, meeting a lot of aspiring writers, how many folks in the room are aspiring writers or writing a little bit of fiction or nonfiction? Almost half of us. One of the things that I encounter a lot in meeting folks like you is, at this stage of the game, you just want any agent, and that's kind of what's driving that question. But I think as you go along, you'll find, finding the right fit is tough. It's like finding your soulmate, but it's a big part of, I think, your goal ultimately as well. My next question that I have here is both for Victoria and Mike, kind of getting into the heads of what a literary agent does. How many folks are thinking about possibly going into agenting at some point? 3 of you, 4 of you maybe. So what is it that motivates you, Victoria, as a literary agent?
Well, those are sort of 2 different questions. One is what motivates you, and the other is what an agent does. So which one would you rather I answer?
I'm really interested in, what you're personally kind of interested in the profession for.
I have done a lot of, we were actually talking about this before this started. I've had almost every publishing job imaginable, from author to promotional writer to book club editor to trade editor to mass market editor. And I think at every stage, what has motivated me and everyone else I know pretty much is the love of whatever it is you're working on, and your commitment to take something that's in, an unformed form and then see it do brilliantly. To meet an author who really has something to say, who really has talent, and watch that talent bloom. Now, in 2009, as an agent, you also want something you can sell, which has become much, much harder, especially in fiction, than it used to be, even in nonfiction. But I think for me and for pretty much everyone I know, publishing was never about the money, or it was about fine literate companionship, but mostly it was about really passion for whatever it is you're reading right now.
What is it about about literature, books, reading? I mean, it's a unique profession to go into, to spend so much time reading work. What is it that really, attracts you to it?
I'll answer only for me. I'm sure Mike will have a different answer. I'm a big escape person. As a kid, I did no homework. I read a billion books, many of them mysteries, and I constantly had daydreams. And that's all I did. That and, listen to records, which is what CDs were when I was listening to them. And I really love escape. I have no wish to live in real life. Books are heavenly. My God, you go to the library, they're free. They take you out of yourself. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So for me, that's the answer.
How about you, Mike?
How about me what?
What motivates you? Why, you had a very eclectic career that has led to this point. Why do you think it is that ultimately drew you to being an agent?
Well, it turns out that it's the right work for me to do, and it's because I love to read also, and so I spent many years on a graduate path thinking I would be a professor of literature.
Sure.
Realizing I didn't want to do that, and then I went and did business, and I really liked doing business stuff, but not enough to only do business stuff. And being a literary agent means, on the one hand, reading through a huge stack of materials to find quality, and on the other hand, being able to look at that good quality writing and think like a business person about whether it has any commercial possibility at all, and being able to make honest judgments and communicate in a constructive way with whoever's doing that writing.
What was it for you? I'm sure we have some folks in here who will end up in academia, and you're making, at some point you'll make the decision, do I want to end up teaching or do I want to end up in the profession of publishing? What was it for you? I mean, you were working on your PhD on Finnegan's Wake. That's pretty far along in the game.
What's the question?
What was it that ultimately drew you to being an agent rather than going down the academic path?
Well, I chose not to go down the academic path for reasons that have to do with what's wrong with academia for me. And it was a circuitous 10-year route for me to get out of academia and into being an agent.
Sure.
So, I mean, there are a lot of things wrong with the university college structure as it currently exists, beginning with there are no jobs for teachers. Those jobs are horribly paid. The status of being a teacher in the United States is embarrassingly disrespected, speaking broadly. You work 7 years somewhere and then you don't get tenure. and you might be in a place that you don't want to be at anyway. Like, there's just all kinds of reasons not to pursue an academic career. You don't get to choose where you live. You don't get to control the amount of money you earn. You don't get to control who comes to your classes, whether they pay attention, do they do the homework. I mean, there's just all kinds of issues there.
Do you get some of those things from being an agent, though? It seems like being an agent, you pretty much have to live in New York. You know, you're confined.
you
I'm
don't.
good with that.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a few who don't.
But there are many agents who don't live in New York, in fact. I mean, I know some really good agents who live out of town. And, you know, you don't, I mean, you can always work for yourself. I mean, I wouldn't particularly want to, because I'm a sort of extroverted person, but you can, in fact, set up shop in your bedroom, you know, especially with the email.
Sure.
Now everything is done electronically. So, you know, you're not, I think one of the things that for me works about being an agent, which also worked for me being a writer, you can't necessarily make yourself a tremendous success, but you can't fire yourself either. I mean, anyone who's ever had their life upended overnight, as Randall can tell you, because hundreds of people were fired at Random House a couple of months ago. The day I started at the literary agency, 600 employees of the book club were fired, literally that day. And you know what? Nobody can fire me. I might not make a living, but that'll be my fault.
It's like running your own business if you are an independent operator, or even if you're within a larger agency.
Absolutely.
Because you succeed on the basis of how well you work.
Well, the reason why I asked the question, I think, is that a lot of people are going to have to make that choice. Not to put you on the spot, but it's one that I share, I think, a common bond with you. I teach part-time at North Carolina State University, but that has been a very deliberate choice to teach part-time and keep one foot in producing and publishing. You know, my wife teaches full-time at NC State, so it's a matter of figuring out what you're good at and what your best fit is, and I think, you know, hearing different experiences helps a little bit.
I'd like to add a little something, because I only talked about why I walked away from academia. And one of the wonderful things about being an agent is that you choose your clients. You choose the people that you work with. So just like you don't get fired by anybody else, you choose who you're going to do business with. Maybe not, you might not choose which editor you're going to work with, but the person that you're most intensely engaged with in building their career is someone that you select. And that is, after having worked in a corporation for 7 or 8 years, it's a real privilege to get to decide who you're going to do your work with every day.
Very cool. Randall, take us through the typical timeline of a debut author's book, published as a paperback original, let's say, from acquisition to 6 months post-publication.
Well, we'll look at it as like a series of ideals. To describe, it's a unicorn type of thing. If you ever see it actually happen, let me know. A book will get acquired, and you'll write a book. You will submit it to agencies. The agent will love it. You will have that soulmate relationship with the agent. Then the agent will submit it to editors. The editor will take it to an acquisitions board, or depending on how the house works, any number of different people. Get everybody behind it. They will buy the book. You will, of course, then be a millionaire, at which point you will have a couple of months to rewrite your book and work with the editor on developing it, depending on how much time you have and where it is in the schedule. While you're doing that, the editor is doing any number of things with the various departments at the house, and it depends on what publishing house you're with, whether or not the editor is really the primary editorial shepherd for it, or whether they're the primary production shepherd for it. Is your editor at a small house, for example, also essentially your top marketing person or your top publicity person, or is your editor shepherding it through the publicity process, or is your editor just handing it off to a publicity manager? So it can be any number of different things that happen while you're writing your book, and once you've finished your book and it's going through then the actual production process of being typeset and bound and put into galley and ARC form, and then submitted to all these different newspapers to get reviews. It's a wide variety of things, and then it eventually does get published and shipped and put into warehouses and sold on Amazon, and you can buy it in a store. And that can take, generally, the fastest ones, a book can be done in a month if it's a crash book. We're getting submissions now for books of things that are relevant now and will not be in a couple of months, so you print them now. And then there are books that are 2 years down the line.
Have you seen much difference in, let's say, a debut author's book and somebody who is better established, like Lee Child, for example, in the development of the book from the editor's perspective?
It's a book-to-book thing. The really most established authors, the ones who are 12 books into their career, they have a set system really as to how they write. It's their career. It's how they work. So, I mean, it's not something that a lot of the times they're doing while teaching or while doing something else. So they have the set amount of time that I'm going to churn out a book a year, and so we base our production schedule off of that. We know that every June, like clockwork, we're going to get a book from one of our authors, and then that's going to come out the following July. I don't think I think it's a book-to-book thing as far as how much time gets dedicated to each and where it goes in the process.
Very cool. Mike, let's talk a little bit about some of the marketing strategies that you've seen, or book campaigns that you've seen that have affected a book's success. One of the things that we've mentioned very early on here is for authors, it's not enough just to write a book anymore. A lot of authors really have to have a little bit of marketing savvy behind you, or have a publisher who's willing to do that. And I think more often than not, for a debut author, you have to be able to take up the reins of that yourself a lot of the time. But Mike, what are a couple of the more original marketing strategies or book campaigns that you've seen?
Well, I've only been doing this for a little over a year, so I don't have a great answer to that question, because part of the question is where it really affected the success of a book.
Sure.
What I can tell you is that we think creatively about every single book that we're going to do. How are we going to make this visible? And one of the things that we do is we'll interview with a camera like this and a microphone like this every one of our authors in-house, and then I edit it because I do publicity stuff. I'll edit it in a conversation with that writer and with Joe Regal, who runs the agency, and we cycle through it until we think it's perfect, and then we'll use that to contact people in print, in radio, in television, to say, oh, you should have this person on this show or on that show, or look how great they are on camera, or here, this is like, for instance, we have a book by Jim Reston that's about some battles between Muslims and Christians 500 years ago. So we're like, yeah, so how do we sell a book about something that happened 500 years ago? Oh, here's our answer. We'll use news clips of Barack Obama and George Bush talking about the war on terror, because ultimately this book is about the origins of the battles that continue today between Christians and Muslims. So we've got pictures of 9/11 in the video that we're using, because it's a fairly aggressive attempt on our part to say, this is relevant to today. It actually is. It is relevant, and it is important if you want to understand why there are people that want to, fly planes into large buildings in the U.S.
How about you other guys? Randall, have you seen any really interesting marketing campaigns?
The one that I really think was very innovative at the time, and now is something that the industry is using. There was a book that an agent named Alex Glass did at Trident, and it was sold, I want to say, to Harper Perennial, and it's called The Average American Male, by an author named Chad Colchin, and it's a debut novel, and it's just an extremely filthy book, and that's what it has going for it. It's really just this obscene book, and they did YouTube videos for it, and they hired, the publishing house, I believe, hired actors and did like 30-second spots for it, and it got a lot of buzz, and it really set itself apart in the market. And the book wasn't a raging bestseller, but for what it was supposed to sell versus what it actually sold, it did quite well for itself because of that. We have a book coming out in the summer called Fragment, which is a big techno sci-fi thriller similar to Michael Crichton. And we're doing like YouTube videos, and we're doing videos that are going to be shown through sci-fi.com. And it's that sort of same sort of idea of taking ideas that are in the book and then putting it into a video and making it viral so that people will look at it and then want to keep sending it and eventually go and get the book. That's the key to it, to find a marketing device that doesn't just have itself self-encompassed, but to direct people to actually get the book.
Interestingly, I think the YouTube videos are right up my alley. I've got a self-published book that I'm putting out this summer. It's basically a mountain lion thriller version of Jaws set in Arizona. And just on a whim, I said, well, I wonder if I could get some footage of somebody being attacked by a mountain lion. And so I figured out how to do that, and I got some footage of a guy being kind of mauled by a mountain lion, put it up on YouTube, and then at the end of the clip, it's like a 25-second clip. At the end of the clip, this rock music comes on, and it says, Claws, summer 2009, that kind of thing. And at last count, like 2 days ago, whenever I checked it, or maybe a couple hours ago, it was at 85,000 views. And it's like growing, it gets exponential in how people are viewing this thing. Now, how many of them are going to buy the book? Who knows? But exposure, I think, is a big part of it. How about you, Victoria? Have you?
Well, I'm just wondering if you were responsible for Siegfried and Roy.
No. Honestly, this was it was nice how this mountain lion mauled this guy. It was a nice mauling.
Polite mauling?
I will say there are, just today I was involved. I have a novel coming out, really not for a year, by a wonderful writer who's also a stand-up comic named Karen Bergreen. And her novel, Following Polly, the editor is planning to do a sort of teaser campaign of blurbs, where sort of every week a whole cast of people will get a wonderful, wonderful blurb from someone, trustworthy. Jodi Picoult, I know that Atria did a great campaign, and I only wish I can tell you exactly what they did. A lot of books are made by, and there's nothing new about this, and there's nothing electronic about it, but you have a book, a few people on your sales force fall in love with it. They get it into the hands of either the buyers at various bookstores, or often the wives of the male buyers, because women buy many more books than men do. And you build a groundswell months before publication. And that encourages, one of the things that exists today, which I'm sure you all know about, that in-store space is paid for. It never used to be true, but it is now. If you see a book on a new fiction table at a Borders or a Barnes & Noble, a publisher's paid a lot of money for that to happen. And if they don't pay money for that to happen, your book is dead. I have a book that's dying, which I will not mention, although it's wonderful, because it's spine out in the back of the store. Nobody knows anything about it. Many book sections have closed. But there is still that sort of personal building, we were talking about like Water for Elephants, where you simply get people who love it and love it so much that they pass it on and pass it on. There are, groups like if you're a Jewish author, there are some very active Jewish book circles. And that can really help sell a book. The Red Tent by Anita Diamond, really built that way. Nowadays, book groups can really build a book. It's unusual, but it does really happen now.
One other strategy that I'll be trying with this new book this summer, how many folks have heard of a blog tour? Anybody heard of a blog tour? Well, being in and around the business, I've gotten to know a lot of folks over the past few years. And so what I'm trying to do for this book is set up a blog tour where I'll actually be a guest blogger on somebody's site for 45 days in a row. So far I have about 25 folks set up, everybody from best-selling authors down to just local authors just starting out. And again, it's exposure, it's getting on other sites, it's being persistent and consistent with that. Have you heard of anybody doing a blog tour or anything like that?
Sure. We have, one of the things that we have, in each case we'll look at our authors and say, well, what can we do with this person that will help drive sales? And one of our best-known authors is this woman, Audrey Niffenegger, whose book is going to come out this fall. And in her case, she has a very large base of fans from her first book, The Time Traveler's Wife. And so one of the things that I thought of that is like a blog tour and it's related to book groups is, what we have that people would like is access to her. And we can provide access to her. So we're going to make signed copies of her books, or maybe some early drafts or some handwritten notes, things that a big fan of hers would love to have available to, let's say, the first 10 book groups that decide that they're going to do her book in December. So we'll try to entice people who might read the book anyway to go buy the book in October, be competing because, oh, I'm going to get a signed copy from her or a little note, or when she does her tour in my city, I'm going to get to have dinner with her. Holy cow, dinner with Audrey Niffenegger, that's great. You know, I mean, but with someone who's unknown, it's useless. You're just, it better be a really well-written book.
I guess the bottom line is you really, if you're thinking about being a writer or entering publishing, a big part of it is getting the word out about who you are as a writer or the authors that you work for. It's a huge part of the equation. If everybody just thought for a moment about some author that you hadn't heard of previously a year ago, but that you've heard of in the past year, think about, well, where do you hear about books? And as a writer or as a publisher, those are the places you want to be thinking about. Well, switching gears just a little bit, let me try and get inside of your minds for a minute if I can. When you're evaluating a piece of fiction, what exactly are you looking for? You get tons of manuscripts. Many of them are perfectly, legible and good, but there's something else that you're looking for. What, Simon Cowell calls the X factor in fiction. So what is it?
It's always hard to say. You're looking to be so entranced that you can't put it down. You're not, it's easier to say what you're not looking for. You're not looking for something that's familiar. And I do a lot of thrillers and stuff. And man, you give me the words, oh, a pharmacy is putting out a deadly drug, and I'm asleep. It's just been done a million times, and even if you do it well, it's such an uphill climb. What I look for very much is, narrative voice, the kind of writer you as I used to say at the club, books I really loved, I couldn't put it down if the curtains were on fire. And that actually happened to me, by the way, years ago, where my apartment was on fire and I was 3 pages from the end of a book and I finished the book before I ran out. It's true. It's an actual true story. That's one of the things you're looking for. Something original, something that does not have obvious dumb mistakes like between you and I. Dumb grammatical errors that, a book can be wonderful, but if there are obvious dumb errors and you read for a living as we do, you just want to murder somebody. So really be careful about what you send in. But it's something that leaps off the page and you just have to finish.
How many submissions do you get per week, and how many of those are like that, would you say? What percentage?
I'm a sucker for a book, so I probably read more of every book than I should. I don't know, I get 30, 40, 50 submissions a week, something like that. At least half of them are reasonably well written. There are a lot of people who can kind of write. And I think one of the time-consuming things, I don't know if you find this, Mike, but is you have something and it's kind of pretty good. And yet, there's a big difference between something's really good and you can sell it just to an editor and something that's, it's pretty good and I'm enjoying it and I really would like to finish it. But when you're honest with yourself, it's not great. And you're not in this climate. Many years ago, you probably would have sold it in this climate. You just won't.
How about you, Randall? What are you looking at have you gotten many submissions, one?
Yeah, tens of thousands of pages a year. Between the books that we're publishing and the books that we're considering to publish, and then books that just come in and you read 50 pages and that's the end of it. And that's distilled from, this is from agents, so that's distilled from just the general pool of what gets sent to agents. I think it varies again, book to book. If I'm reading commercial thriller, then I'm looking for something that's really, I want to care about the thrill of it. I want to, care about the plot. If it's something more literary, I might be looking more character, but it's not to say that looking at one disregards the other. Ideally, it's everything working on one gear. And ultimately, editorially, I'm looking for something that, I'm sorry, I don't, grammatical mistakes, I don't care about. We have copy editors. We have really good people who know that. I don't. I have a copy of the Chicago Manual of Style, and I can barely read that. So I'm not worried about that as much as I'm looking for if what I feel is lacking in that book, I can see in another part of your book or in your writing that I can work with you on, then that's something that I want to pursue. If I sense that your secondary characters are all very thinly drawn, but you have a really solid protagonist, so I know you know how to write a character, this is not something that you're strictly writing the plot, then that's something I feel I can work with you on. So it's looking for those different qualities as what are the weaknesses of the book and how do the strengths ballast that so it becomes just a strong book. Can I sell it less to the public than to all the people I'm working with to get a really good team effort behind it? So that, I mean,
It's a great answer.
book to book.
Can I just speak to that difference? And it does, not to belabor it, well, to belabor it, because you're getting stuff that's sifted through agents, you don't have to sort of make that quick decision. We're spending all day buried in these pages. It's not sifted at all. And therefore you sort of take signals from stuff.
I disagree
Yeah.
insofar that your time frame can be a lot longer as an agent because if you've ever submitted to agents, it can take an incredibly
Yes.
long time. And an agent doesn't necessarily know if somebody else is looking at it. It goes through every sort of thing. Whereas if a publisher is looking at it, a lot of the times we get a book and it closes in a week. The agent's going to have an auction in a week, so we have a week to read it. A lot of times it's less time than that. So I think that to a degree we're getting the sheer tonnage of manuscripts we're getting, a lot of times publishers have a lot less time to read it. So
But someone has been through it before.
yes, that is true.
It's, believe me, you
Yes.
have no idea
Someone
how much
has been through it
gone
before.
into all of those books before you ever see them.
It's an interesting answer that you gave, Victoria, because I would tend to agree with you. I think as a writer myself, I want the manuscript to be as polished as it could possibly be. If it takes 2 years, 5 years working on it, tinkering with it every now and again, I want it to be completely free of the basics, grammatical stuff, certainly. And I want it to be a hell of a read, too. But I interviewed Michael Connelly about 2 or 3 months ago, and he's a New York Times bestselling author of The Brass Verdict most recently. And I asked him, I said, what is one thing that you would do differently in your career now that you've achieved this success? And he said, I wouldn't have tinkered around with my first novel as long as I did. And that kind of shocked me, it sort of surprised me. But basically he said, I edited it and I edited it and I edited it for years and years. And when I ended up selling the book, I had an editor who was going to redo that all himself, and it was kind of shocking to me to hear that.
It's a more complex question than that, because when you're an agent, you're going to have to parse through things. Things have to be perfect, and I don't mean grammatically perfect, but I mean readable and great, because it's so hard to sell a novel that an editor will throw it out if it's not great. They won't give it the time of day. I mean, I'm not talking about grammar. I'm talking about, making it. Listen, there are writers who are really obsessive, and there are writers who aren't really obsessive. And, it's, yes, I mean, you can work on a title for 10 years, and then the editor gets it and says, oh, that's a terrible title, let's call it X, But it's hard to explain what I mean, but there's really, I don't think, I know Michael Connelly, he couldn't have spent less time, because that's who he is.
Keep in mind, too, at that point in his career, he had already been shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah, exactly.
So he knew how to
That's
write.
exactly right. He wasn't just writing for people at large, he was a well-known journalist.
How about you, Mike? What are you looking for when you evaluate a piece of fiction?
Well, I have a whole speech about this that I'll try to keep short.
Awesome.
But I think that maybe this is the most important thing that I have to say, and it has to do with what I've observed a little over the last year. I've been reading what we call the slush pile, which are all the unsolicited manuscripts. So the first thing that you should know is that we look at every single one of them, no matter where it comes from. We don't care who you are, where you went to school, what you've done before, what you've published. I skip the synopsis. I usually don't look at the cover letter. In fact, my boss will just flip a manuscript open to the middle, and he says it's like a pie. You stick a fork in the middle of a pie. It tastes as good in the middle as it does on the edge. There's a chance you get just the crust or something, but it's the writing. It's the only thing that matters. It's the only thing that matters. And there's no mystery or secret about what is good writing. It's there in the store for you. It's in your classes. It's in your library. I brought some examples in case someone wanted to hear what were some first paragraphs where I instantly knew this was something that would get published. But the main thing about the business that we're in that I have noticed over the last year is that merit is recognized. And that is not true in a lot of businesses. There's a lot of places in the universe where quality is not recognized, and it is recognized. Now, I'm not saying every good writer gets published or every good writer makes money. In fact, that's simply not true. But as I went back through our slush pile, reading things that had been submitted weeks or in some cases months before, when I came across something like Hello Kitty Must Die, which I instantly knew was really interesting, I would contact that person and they would already have an agent. All the other things that I came across that were like that, where I thought, oh, this is terrific. Oh, it came in 4 months ago. Gone. Person has been taken by an agent. Why? Because they're a good writer. So I'm not actually looking for anything. I think of myself as a filter, and that it's my job to recognize talent in writing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And if I don't see it, someone else does. So the flip side of it is, if I say no, well, I'm just one guy, right? That's why you submit broadly, because I could hand these first paragraphs to everyone in this room, and you'd all argue about which of them was any good, and that's no different from what we do.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an interesting point. It leads to one of these questions that I have down here. I do want to remind folks that we will take questions at 6:45, so about another 15 minutes of these prepped questions, and then 15 minutes of questions from the audience. So if you're thinking of something, prepare yourself to raise your hands. So one of the questions that I had was, you guys are both pretty new at Aging, although Victoria, you were at the Book of the Month Club for some time and gaining experience and credibility that way. But how do you compete with these more established agents? And what is it that you can offer?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you what, I was very lucky because I've been an agent for just about 2 years. But I came from having worked in publishing for 30 some odd years. I've been an editor, I've been a writer. As editor-in-chief of a really quite good book club, I met 1 million authors. So I have much more access to writers than I would have had if I hadn't worked in the industry. What I have to offer is, I was an editor, so I'm very editorially active. And many agents are, and especially agents who used to be editors. And it's pleasure. I mean, I would love to receive something that's absolutely perfect. And I have, actually. I mean, it's a wonderful novel called Bad Things Happen. It's coming out in July. And it's just wonderful and perfect. And believe me, I didn't do a thing. But it's also fun to get your hands into it and make something good even better, So I certainly have that. And, I have unbounded enthusiasm and energy. And when you work in an industry for as many years as I've worked in it, I know a lot of people, and that is of benefit to an author.
It's huge.
Because it means when I send it to an editor, they'll read it, at least the first few times. After I fail them, it might be quite different.
Oh, you're being modest. How about you, Mike?
Well, I have two answers to that question. One is, I don't compete with established agents, because if someone is sophisticated enough and a good enough talent to either go with me or Eric Simonoff, they're going to go with Eric Simonoff. They're going to go with Sloan Harris. I mean, they're not going to choose me because they're incredibly talented. They have their choice of agents, and I simply don't have the same experience. And if that's something they care about, then they won't pick me. Mm-hmm. The flip side of that is that I'll actually answer the phone when they call, and good luck getting those other people who are very talented and successful on the phone. I have time, and I'm looking to build a list, which means I'm actually interested in talking to a wider range of people than someone who is a very established and powerful and successful agent.
Let's kind of talk about the typical day in the life of an editor and agent. Take us through a typical day, Randall. Morning, afternoon, evening. What's your life like during the week?
There's no typical day. It's Any day starts between 7 and 8 when I get to the office. Before that, I'm reading on the train, generally. A day can involve anything from reading submissions to writing decline letters, apologetically, of course, to working on marketing materials, to handing things off to production, to culling quotes from all the different newspapers that Publicity have handed us to find the best quotes for a book jacket, looking at book covers, talking to the art department, going to any number of different meetings that are going to be held in what we call a span. So Random House Publishing Group has 3 spans a year, spring, summer, and fall, and they're 4-month spans. So a book that comes out in January versus a book that comes out in March, they're going to be in the same span. So we're going to have a marketing meeting for all of those books at one point. So it's books like that, and then it's just really any day is going to be a cornucopia of strange requests and demands and needs and anything like that. Anything like that. Legal issues. It's. I don't think I had a normal day when I was in agenting, though, either. I think that one of the nice things about publishing and the chaos of it is you will not have a normal shift, and that's got to at least be heartening that it's never a dull moment. So.
Do you wish you had more organization and order in your daily life? From 8 to 9, you're answering emails. 9 to 10, you're
no. There are
taking phone
agents.
calls.
There are agents who work that way. One of our copywriters, our copy editors, she was answering a question for a client of mine, and she said that she works a 60-minute hour. That she will shut her door and she will work on the grammar and all that stuff for 60 minutes of an hour, and that's straight, no breaks, whatever. And the idea of that to me, I like that I'm working on something for 20 minutes and then I'm bouncing over to something else for 5 minutes and I'm coming back to it. It's, I don't know, it's a riddled and starved way of
ADD.
Yeah, it works for me.
Perfect.
I think other people do it differently, and that's just one of the reasons why I really love what I do. I get to really do any number of different things on any given day.
It's very creative. How about you, Mike? Take us through a typical day, morning, afternoon, evening.
So his observations are relevant to my situation. One of the funny things that I discovered about being an agent is that unlike as an academic where you really need to finish all the things that you're supposed to read, in my job, part of what I need to do is to figure out really quickly after maybe a paragraph or a page or two what's going on in a piece of writing and decide whether I should keep reading it or not. Mm-hmm. So there is an element of being able to make quick judgments, because one of the things that I'll do each day is I'll go through the unsolicited submissions and I'll evaluate whether I want to see more. And if I like something, I'll say send me 10 or 20 pages. And if I've read those 20 pages over the course of the weekend, which is when I really do my reading, that's when I read novels. It's when I will sit down with a cup of coffee on Saturday morning and read through a whole novel. That's one component. I make the videos for our authors, so I do that. I will be calling, Anne-Marie Maldonado at, some NPR show saying, hey, we really think you should look at this video. This person should be on your show. So I'll be pitching. Mm-hmm. I'll have a meeting with an author who is got a sample chapter that I've got a bunch of red line comments, and we need to talk about that. So. And I'll be having meetings with my colleagues. What do you think about this proposal? Do you think this is ready to go? Do you think we've got the right focus? We're doing a book on, there's a book that I'm pitching right now, these 2 editors, the last 2 editors of Playgirl magazine. They want to write a history of Playgirl magazine and what it tells us about American culture and the state of women's erotic lives over the last 36 years. And so is it a picture book with lots of, naked men? Is it about feminism? Is it just kitschy? How are we going to sell this book? What's the right focus for this book? And that is, everyone has an opinion. So
how should they pitch it, Victoria?
Pardon me?
How should they pitch it, the Playgirl book?
Oh God, it sounds terrible to me. I'm sorry. It sounds just awful. I have no idea how to pitch it.
Well, take us through your typical day, morning, afternoon, evening.
Well, my answer is exactly, sort of the same as theirs. Although my day starts much later. We're a late opening agency. Basically, email has made it impossible to do what you were asking about. The number of emails I'm sure we all get every day. You know, email it's a great equalizer. It's like the web is a great equalizer. You know, I don't know how many of you read like The Lexus and the Olive Tree, the book that what's his name did a couple of years ago. That, you know, you can talk to anybody. You can talk to people in Uganda, and you can talk to the president of Uganda. But it also means that if you have a job where people want your services, you're never at rest. You know, I get emails at 2 in the morning, and I certainly get them all day long at my desk. And you have to deal with it, because many of them are from your authors. Authors are very uncertain and scared, and they're working alone in their home or their office, and they need help, and they need reassurance. And questions need to be answered, and problems need to be solved. So I think, in a way like Randall, you know, I can be editing a manuscript, I can be reading a manuscript, I can be dealing with jacket art, I can be taking an author around to publishers, trying to, you know, gain enthusiasm for the book. I can be talking to my colleagues, which we do a lot. You know, in my office, we are an extraordinarily humane and sweet place. So about 100 times a year, I could be eating birthday cake. It's a very, very varied day.
I thought you only have like 12 people in your office.
You have no idea. No, as I said to a friend of mine last week, I work in the Good Housekeeping test kitchen. You can't imagine what goes on.
Let's talk about, this is one of the more hot button issues that has certainly been making the rounds on the blogs with what Bob Miller has done at Harper Studio. What do you guys think about the idea of lowering advances? I'll start with Randall, since you represent the publisher here. What do you think about the idea of lowering advances kind of across the board and yet giving authors a higher percentage royalty?
I think what Harper Studio is doing, as far as being the future of publishing, as far as being the answer as how we save publishing, I don't agree with that. I think that there are too many people on all sides of the equation that don't like the business model that they're doing. And just in case anybody is unclear, the way publishing usually works is publishers will compete for a book that an agent submits, and then they'll pay out an advance, and that advance can be any number whatsoever. And it's often very high, depending on how many publishers want it. What Harper Studio is doing, but then the royalty rates, what an author earns basically per copy, is significantly lower. What Harper Studio is doing is they have capped advances at $100,000, which is a good advance, but for a lot of authors is nothing, it's pocket change. And then their royalty rates are significantly higher, I believe 50% for a book, which is 40% higher than a lot of publishers. And they also promise marketing aspects, and it's an interesting theory. I think as far as being the future, it's not the case, but I think it's another way of doing things, and that's what makes it exciting, and that's what makes it a really intelligent idea. And they have wonderful self-marketing ideas to get people to their website. They're really prominent with Twitter. They have incredibly intelligent people working for them, and I think that different houses will start to adopt some degree of that because it enables them to publish a wider variety of authors and avoid a degree of tent-polling authors where you only focus on like one guy for a span or a month or a week even. That's why it's a hot button issue. There's a lot of different ways of looking at it.
And I'm sure publishers represent a different side of the equation than agents. So what do you think, Victoria?
Well, we're very open to it. In fact, we sold Bob Miller one of his first acquisitions. And, you know, publishing is changing a lot. Everything about publishing is changing. You know, the Kindle is here, the Sony e-reader is here, print on demand is here. The whole industry is changing. And this is something that is changing with it into a million different variations. As Randall said, this is one of them. We're certainly very open to it. We're also open to conventional arrangements. I mean, everything is up for grabs right now. And for a certain kind of author, before Harper Studio started, I mean, there are many people who do many things, but Roger Cooper, who used to be at a number of companies, Berkeley, and then he was actually at the Literary Guild, our main competition at Book of the Month Club. Roger started up Vanguard,
Yeah.
and they're doing very well. They take authors, often authors who were very well known and whose careers have sort of fallen off. And they do a hell of a job. They also, I don't know if they must pay some kind of advance, but either something rather low or non-existent, but the writer gets a huge amount of royalty, and they do a lot of marketing. Well, that's been great for his authors, or at least for the ones that I know about. I mean, we're open to all kinds of ideas.
How about you, Mike? How do you feel about that particular issue?
I've been in the industry for the shortest period of time, so I don't have the strongest opinion, and I certainly don't speak on behalf of Regal Literary, but I can say that it seems stupid to me to have things arranged the way they are currently, where publishers are forced into competing up to levels where they're spending more money than they can actually afford to spend to get a book. They take on all the risk, and if they do really well, some of the reward gets shared, and if they blow it, all of the risk is in their hands. Frankly, I think that
You're an agent.
I care about the long-term survival of the industry. I think that if publishers screw themselves and agents allow that to happen, that's not a long-term good for the writers or the readers or the publishers, because it's an ecosystem, right? So if one element of it dies, guess what? The rest of it is not going to thrive.
So we're looking to the best and the brightest of you guys to come up with a new business model to be implemented. I think what Harper Studio is doing is interesting. Like you said, Randall, I wouldn't be one bit surprised to see a couple of other publishers try it in a limited capacity to begin with.
Some of them are doing it. Some of them did it even before Bob started. I don't want to say who, but there are very big authors who, because they're so famous, have that kind of deal.
How about hardcovers? It seems like, I was reading an article in Poets and Writers just the other day that sort of said the business model for publishing hardcovers is just isn't where publishing is today. What do you guys think about moving towards just publishing paperback originals, or doing it more so than hardcovers? Or is that just
mass
talk?
market was huge 25 years ago, and now if you're published as a mass market, the 4x7 format, drugstore books, you're dead. It just died. Trade paperbacks are doing much better now than they used to, and they're getting some critical reception. Again, it's one of those things I think is up for grabs. Who knows what's going to happen?
Any thoughts on that, Randall?
I mean, to tie it into this room, publishing, it's not, the content is always going to be there. There's always going to be writers. The writers of today are no better, no worse than the writers of 10 years ago, than 100 years ago, 500 years ago. There are still great writers, there are still great books to be written. The industry itself is under a major flux. They're finding that the business models that they've been using aren't working anymore, that it's harder to get people into a bookstore, it's harder to get people to buy a book once they're in the bookstore, and it's harder to get people to buy a specific book. And what that means is that for everyone in this room who's looking to get into publishing in one way or another, is just you have all the opportunity in the world to set yourself apart and to come up with all these different solutions for the problems that are facing publishing today. And if you pick up an issue of Publishers Weekly, I don't know how much of it is available online, but you can always look and see what these problems are and come up with your own innovative solutions. And really, it's a tremendous amount of opportunity of what you can accomplish not being in the industry right now versus what the publishing industry can do simply because it's so large for it to maneuver as a major house. It's difficult, but the young and the swift can do very well for themselves now.
A quick one-line answer across the board, and then we'll take questions from the audience. Do you think our industry is healthy? Victoria.
No.
Mike.
I mean, no.
Mike, what do you think?
I don't know.
Randall, is it a healthy industry?
No, but that's great for you guys.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, we'll take questions at this point. Anybody have any questions for our panelists today? Yes, sir, right here.
In terms of submitting to an agent, what's the best thing to send you first? A sample chapter, a couple of chapters, a complete draft? I'm talking about open novel. A complete draft of a novel, which?
For me, I'll answer for me because Mike will have a different answer. I can tell that from how he answered before. For me, a short query letter if you're smart, and I know even our website doesn't say this, but the truth is, if you put a chapter at the bottom of a query letter, I can't help but read it. And if it's good, I'm going to want to see it. But it's just a smart query letter that engages me. And then I'm going to say, send me the whole manuscript electronically as a single email attachment. Because I'm one of those readers who, I don't want to read 50 pages and then have to wait. So for me, I'd rather have too much. But a really good query letter and a little writing sample is awfully good.
What about you, Mike?
What she said, a query letter, which I'll probably not take very seriously because it's such a strange, curious little animal all by itself that doesn't really represent. No person in a bookstore is ever going to read a query letter. A person in a bookstore is going to read the first 5 pages of your book, maybe, and that's what I look at. So I ask that we actually changed our policy when I started reading stuff. I said I don't want to write back to people and say, oh, please send me a sample. Send me 10 pages. And if I like it, I'll ask for more.
But you said something before about just having all these manuscripts and opening to the middle, which I thought was interesting, or opening it randomly and just...
Okay, so that's a very specific circumstance where I'm saying to Joe Regal, hey, I think this is really great. Take a look at it. And he flips open to the middle because he's like...
your first look at it.
I mean, he's also kind of just having some fun. But I mean, in reality, I begin at the beginning.
I always found that a query letter was a lot more important because it's a way of seeing if the writer can basically string together some sentences. It's a way of getting a sense as to who the writer is. I mean, looking at the idea of a career, is this a writer who is writing one book and that is it? Or is this a writer who is looking to keep writing? That's a very different decision that an agent's going to make as to whether to take on a book versus a writer. And then as far as a query letter, I find this with agents, what they send to me, if it's got a really good hook line, where it's just one sentence that if I can be lazy and just take what they have written to me and say to a Salesforce, you're in the house alone and the drapes are on fire, do you keep reading? And that's the book itself. And the Salesforce can go, oh, that's incredible, I want to read that. Then that's something that I think that really can help you. So I actually think a query letter is incredibly important. A lot of agents, if you attach a chapter, attachments can get just deleted automatically based on virus software and whatnot. I think if you just send a query letter in an email, and I'm big on all agents accepting email queries.
That's all we accept.
Good, great.
But when I said that about putting in a few pages, I literally meant in
Yeah,
the
at the
body.
bottom,
Because really, he's right.
That's a tip for
once it's an
writers.
attachment in a query letter, I'm not even going to bother opening it.
In the back?
All right, I was just curious. Come across a manuscript that you think is well written, but that it's just not your cup of tea. Either the genre isn't something that you normally work with, or the topic isn't something you feel is really relevant or something. What do you do normally?
That's a
You're
great
addressing, I'm very moody. And the truth is, if something really appeals to me and there's something about the person I really like, and I have a little bit of time, I will actually say, I'll write a couple of lines, I might even recommend another agent. Very often, one of the pieces of advice I was given when I first started was, don't ever do that, just say, sorry, it's not for me. You just get into trouble when you do that. You end up having these long email relationships with people. And I tend to, it just completely depends. If it's not for me and I have no feeling for it at all, then I'm just going to say, basically, sorry, it's not for me. Today I had a query from a woman who is writing a memoir about ulcerative colitis. And I wrote back very truthfully, my father had ulcerative colitis, and it doesn't make me more interested. It makes me never want to hear the words again. And here's someone you might want to contact. Because she wrote a really nice letter. It was a very good query letter. And I liked her, and I really wished her well. I just didn't want to do it. But I think that, are you consistent? Because I'm not.
If I like a book, I'm going to do what I can to get it published. If I'm not the right editor for it, and it happens quite often, then I work in a company of editors. There's any number of people that can take on a book. Occasionally, while Random House is, tops in the industry, and I do believe that actually. I think that there are a lot of books that are better placed with the small independent houses that have just time and energy and affinity for a certain type of book that they can really focus on. And sometimes if I like a book but I don't really think it's going to work, whatever that means for me or for Random House, then I'm happy to see what I can get done to get it to the right person.
It's amazing. I do a lot of events for aspiring writers. I've done probably 150 to 200 in the past 3 to 5 years. And I can tell right away if somebody has this sort of get-rich-quick mentality about publishing. A lot of times they'll say, well, I've got this one book and it's going to sell millions of copies. And editors and agents can pick up on that just as quickly. And I think most folks are looking for somebody to build a career with. And somebody who's really in it for the long haul. And if you can communicate that in your letter, I think that goes a long way. How do you guys feel about, the one-hit wonder versus, somebody like Michael Connelly, who was not a bestseller with his first few books, but built it slowly over a decade?
I love that, but publishers have very little tolerance for that now.
In your query letter, regardless of what you are doing, put in the last paragraph that you are currently at work on your follow-up. Put that at work. Always put that. And it helps, in case the agent is interested, to have a sense as to even just a plot, just a one-line plot. Ideally what you should be doing is, if you have a first novel that's done and you've got it in a drawer, you should at least have the outline for the second one done, because what we're going to judge as publishers is the scheduling of it. If we buy a multiple book deal, we're going to want to publish your hardcover in June of this year. We're going to want to publish the trade paperback or the mass market paperback of that book in May of the following year, and the next hardcover that you write in June of the following year. So that means you're going to have probably a much smaller window of time to write that second book. And we need to do that so that we can build your name. So it helps to always have something else following. But even if you don't, it's okay to lie just this once and put that in your query letter.
Any other questions? Yes, sir, right here.
I think it's pretty clear that authors, and probably especially first-time authors, are very emotionally connected to their work. And I'm curious, for all of you, the frequency of an author backing out of an editor-author relationship or an agent-author relationship because of what's happening, how an agent sees this piece being pitched or marketed, or how an editor sees the structure of a piece. How often a relationship is ended on the author's part because of something like that?
In my 2 years, it's happened to me once. And it was a very upsetting thing. It was very upsetting for me because I have a relationship with the house. And it doesn't happen very often, may I say. Now, people leave their agents all the time. That certainly happens. And people go all over the place from agent to agent. Some people stay with an agent, forever, some don't. But as far as I did have that happen one time, and it was a very unfortunate circumstance.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Do you have another question?
Do you think it happens infrequently because authors are so starving,
Yes,
to be?
I think it happens that rarely because authors are so starving for. Yeah, sure. But also, listen, most people are pretty competent, Most editors are pretty good. Most agents are pretty good. Most writers who get to that point are pretty good. And listen, when you're publishing your first book, whatever it is, you're a beggar. When you're publishing your 8th book and they're making millions of dollars on you, you're the 500-pound canary, and that's.
To a degree, I think you will always want to have a slightly contentious relationship with your editor. You want your editor to always be pushing you to better yourself as a writer, and I think the great editors do that for writers, regardless of how heavy they are as canaries. I'm of two minds. I told somebody I'm close to who is writing a book that on a subject that's very close to their heart. She was shopping around for agents, and she was trying to find agents that also were really passionate about her topic. And I said to her at this point, I was an agent, and I said, the only two people that ever need to be passionate about what you're writing are you and the reader. And everyone else is there to just basically jack up the price. And that's it's a cynical way of looking at it,
Yeah.
but
Sure
I mean, as a writer, you're going to want to find people who really champion your work, but part of championing your work is getting it to the majority of people, the customer, who are going to look at it, and they're going to be the passionate ones. They're going to be the ones who make you more than a publicity department ever could, more than a marketing department ever could, and more than an editor ever could. So I think you'll always want to find somebody who shares your vision, but will fight you on a lot of different things as a writer to make you better.
In the back. Yes.
I agreed with what you said about academia. I started out as an education major and very quickly backed out after I finished my practicum. And I was wondering, actually, how do you make money at being an agent? Because you made a joke earlier that, obviously not everything that gets put in front of you, you make $1 million on it. So is it easier if you work through an agency, as a house, and then you get paid to read all these books, versus if you were working on your own, like you'd have to have a day job? Does that make sense?
I'm not exactly. I'm a
Well,
little
so
confused.
here's some things that you should be aware of about how the industry is structured. Editors get paid a salary. The editor of an incredibly hot-selling book doesn't make that much money, even when they have an incredibly hot-selling book. They'll get a bonus that is an earthly bonus. An agent gets a percentage of the royalties that go to the writer.